Good evening. The big issue at the First Minister's Conference today, apart from the lumber deal with the United States, was economic equality for women and every other kind of equality too. And I'm going to deal with that tonight, but first here's Steve with the rundown.
Weighing in at nearly 1,200 pages is Whirlwind. It's been described as the priciest book ever sold. The author is James Clavell, and he's in the studio with Webster. Longshoremen are back to work on the Vancouver waterfront, but they're not happy about it. In fact, they plan to challenge the back-to-work legislation in the courts. The minister behind the law is Pierre Cadieux, and he's coming up with Webster. But first, women make up over 40% of the workforce in British Columbia, but are they being treated equally by industry? That was the main topic today at the First Minister's Conference in Vancouver, and Barbara McDougall, the Minister of State for the Status of Women, is up first with Webster.
And for privatization. And Barbara McDougall, first time I've interviewed you, is it really important that you nag some of your colleagues because they belong to little boys' clubs in Calgary?
Well, it's not just my colleagues that belong to little boys' clubs, and I don't care what they do on their own time. But what we're finding is that there is in clubs a lot of informal information passed around among men. I don't regard it as a major issue. I regard it as far more important that we have 3 new women in the Senate, that we have 5 women in the cabinet, that we have 19 in our caucus, 27 in Parliament, that 26% of our appointments are to women, so that there's a lot of changes being made, and that's far more important.
So you can say the Conservative government is an active participant, not in tokenism, but in the adjustment of the female role in government.
Absolutely. And the important thing is not the numbers and the changes in the number of female deputy ministers and so on, but the numbers themselves indicate 2 things. First of all, how far we still have to go. But secondly, that the faces at the table where decisions are made are changing, and they're changing permanently, because there won't be any going back from here. And the Prime Minister has really set a new standard for women in the annals
But today,
of
when he gives his big pitch about daycare and childcare, he didn't give any money because your government is strapped for money. So really, you're just mouthing hope for instance, complete daycare for women who can't presently go out to join the workforce.
No, there's a real commitment that the Prime Minister has and the government has to childcare, because it really is the key that opens the door. The issue is equality, opportunity, and choice.
When you say childcare, you mean what we think of as daycare, do you?
Not necessarily. I mean options for women to choose the way they would like to have their children looked after. Now there's the demand side of that, which is giving people the money to do it, and the supply side, which means ensuring that there's good quality spaces in childcare centers. But there are informal ways that may or may not work. And when you say there's no money there, we need the policy and the program in place, and we have a parliamentary task force looking at that. We have a very strong political will, and the Prime Minister said today that next year, when he meets with other First Ministers again, he expects to have a solution.
I saw a story about the Canadian job strategy, whereby the money put out to get women into particular jobs apparently has been diverted to men.
Wrong. That study is a 10-year study. From 1975 to 1985, and the period of the study ended in June of 1985. Well, the Canadian job strategy didn't come in until September of 1985. And the number of women participating under the Canadian job strategy, or the proportion, has gone from 36% under the old programs to 46% under this program. There still are some wrinkles, and we're watching that job strategy very closely. Benoit Bouchard, who's the Minister of Employment and Immigration, is responsible for it, and he and I are both tracking it very carefully, and if there are problems, we're going to try and fix them.
But when it comes to the large proportion of elderly women who are poor and single parents, of whom there's a vast percentage, women who are poor, all you need to do is give them more money.
We've done some of that, Jack. We've changed the whole pension orientation, the pensions under federal jurisdiction, so that there's now credit splitting on divorce. There are survivor benefits required, and a lot of those will go towards helping elderly women who are poor, not just in the future, but some of that will start right now. We increased the guaranteed income supplement or at least the spousal allowance. We spread the spousal allowance to more women between the ages of 60 and 64. And we've done quite a bit, but there is more to be done. There's no question about that, and we'll just keep moving forward on it because the government is committed to it.
What about the poor housewives? And you're not committed yet to CPP for housewives, are you?
Homemakers' pensions is...
Is that pensions for housewives?
Yes, that's
Am
normally...
I not allowed to say housewives
You
anymore?
are allowed to say housewives, and but there is another word for that, and it's called homemakers. But homemakers' pensions are being discussed right now among officials of governments. But homemakers' pensions are only one way to deal with elderly women who are poor. And as we see more and more women going out into the workforce, then the balance will shift between what we need by way of homemakers' pensions and what we need by way of other issues and other ways to solve it. One of the ways to solve it is to give pension benefits on a pro rata basis to women who work part-time. And that's another thing that we've done.
Was that the Wallace report a few years back?
No, that was our pension reform
Wallace
that
was
just
a liberal.
came in.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And we brought it in. There was 10 years of debate on this, and it's something that we've done that I'm very pleased about because that will make a big difference for women.
I read your little book here today, believe it or not.
All of it?
Most of it, because it's not the most exciting thing in the world. But have you, in fact, gone to equal pay for work of equal value in the federal service?
Mr. Decotre, who is the president of the Treasury Board, is working on that right now with the unions. And
that's an impossible one, isn't it, in private industry?
Well, it's a difficult one depending on how jobs get classified. And it's difficult, for example, in small business. It's not an easy concept.
No, does a woman in the office deserve as much money as the guy driving the truck between here and Calgary?
Probably more. But it's difficult to balance off who is worth what in a job. There's no question about that. But we've done a lot of work on that, a lot of very good work on that. And the Treasury Board is, as I say, dealing with the unions on it right now.
Well, now, we were first of all told that computerization wouldn't mean a loss of jobs. Now we know it means an incredible loss of jobs in many industries. And so therefore, what special preparations are you making to put these unemployed secretarial and clerical workers back into the labour force? Or is it
Well, the
impossible?
number of jobs that have been created in the last 2 years, women have got over half of them, and most of them are full-time
They're
jobs.
half the labour force anyway.
The skills that are required for the future are keyboard skills, are service skills, and those are areas where women are very strong. And what I'd like to see happen is that when they get the skill training, they also get some management training, some peripheral training on accounting and bookkeeping so that they broaden the range of skills, although they may begin with a skill they have now, a keyboard skill or a typing skill or a computer skill. So there's a lot to be done. And technological change shifts the balance of needs. And women are well positioned for the future on this, and I feel fairly optimistic about it. Doesn't mean adjustments won't have to be made.
Other hat for just 2 minutes. What do you want to sell me in your privatization portfolio? Teleglobe I know about. The one that interests me or worries me is the privatization of Air Canada plus the deregulation.
Well, deregulation in the transport industry is very important, and it's coming regardless of privatization. We have not made a decision on Air Canada. I was in Britain last week talking about privatization there, and it's been really very well received among the British. The point is that Air Canada is our flagship Canadian airline.
Nice, stuffy, safe airline.
Well, it will continue to be a safe airline. And there's no question in deregulation that safety remains the #1 priority. And I don't want any confusion about that. No. Deregulation does not mean a reduction in safety standards. But Air Canada will remain our flagship carrier. Now, whether it remains in government hands or whether it is sold to Canadians directly has not yet been decided. We have not established our list of priorities on this.
Will soon?
We will be establishing some soon, but we can't do it all at once. I have 55 Crown corporations, not just one.
55.
Yes, yes. So
Most
I'll
of the
bet
money-
you can't name more than 3.
No, most of the money losers, too.
Yes, a lot of them are.
All right, if you're a woman with a problem about your future or about your training or about dividing your pension on divorce, if that's what you're thinking about, here's the woman to get after. Barbara McDougall, Minister of State for the Status of Women and for Privatization. After the break. Barbara McDougall, Minister of State for the Status of Women. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Ms. McDougall?
Yes?
Yes, go ahead.
My question is, what do you plan to do with regards to welfare women, single women, low income, some with minor to major mental handicaps that don't fall under the HPI category, but there is a drastic need, especially in the city, for low-income housing for women to get them out of these slum rooming houses?
Well, housing is a very important issue that is normally managed by the province. Central Mortgage and Housing does a lot of funding of cooperative housing, which I think is a good solution for women. I know in my riding there's a group of single mothers that are putting together a cooperative apartment building. It is a big issue for welfare women, I know, and it's something that we can address through cooperative housing.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Ms. McDougall, I would like to ask you, how can you guarantee at any time that deregulation is not going to jeopardize safety when it has been proven in other countries that it is doing? I mean, especially in the United States. There are only one thing that companies can really save on, which is not at the face of the public that they can see. You still have to have the same amount of crew on. You still have to have lavish food and lavish service. So the only thing that they can save on is maintenance.
Maintenance.
And not see it, you know. And my
Go on.
That is, I think, with respect, incorrect. That what airlines have been saving on in the States is fancy food and fancy wine and so on, and the lower-priced flights don't offer those anymore. And the safety regulations in our environment, in Canada and in the United States, are both very high standards, and I do want to reassure you on that. That's very important to understand.
Well, we're all nervous about that. Not all the airlines are perfect, not are they all major airlines. That's one of our worries. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to know, Barbara, what your views are on women entrepreneurs and whether the government has plans to assist women in starting small businesses. Some of the programs like Canadian Job Strategies spend a lot of money, and I'm just wondering whether a portion of government money could go to assist women entrepreneurs. I'll hang up to listen to your response.
Thank you. That's a good question, because women are starting a higher and higher proportion of our small businesses, and they are more successful, by the way, than the businesses that men start. Women also tend to go to government less for grants, interestingly enough, and they make a success of their businesses without, which does not mean that there shouldn't be something available. There is a program in the U.S. which I'm looking at right now and may try and adapt to Canada, and that is a private sector women's entrepreneurial network, which provides very pragmatic, very practical training for women entrepreneurs, kind of on-the-job training for women entrepreneurs by other entrepreneurs, and it's a very interesting program.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, Jack.
How did you get on the program?
Well, I'm here to express the view of the other side of the story.
Go ahead.
I'm a 24-year-old white Anglo-Saxon male from a middle-class family, and I'm still waiting to see some advantage that I supposedly have in our society of being a male. There, with quotas on entrance to university faculties, Crown Corporation hirings, police forces, etc. Being a male, it's impossible to break into any of these.
Well, I think there's still a quota for men on those things, too. I think that the world is becoming more competitive. Certainly when I was working, there was a great disadvantage in being female. I don't think that men have ever suffered that same kind of active disadvantage by way of social attitudes, by way of people saying to you, well, you're going to get married and therefore we can't hire you. I don't think anybody's ever said that to you. I don't think anybody's ever said to you, well, we can't hire you because you're going to leave to have a baby. And so things are different for women than they are for men. And we are in a competitive world, there's no question about that. But if you look at the demographics, the proportion of white Anglo-Saxon males in our population is declining. And managerial talent is going to have to come from women, it's going to have to come from other ethnic groups, and business hiring practices are going to have to change with or without government.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, I wanted to talk to Barbara McDougall and ask her what happens to women between the ages of 55 and 60 who no longer get a job, who have worked all their lives, now find themselves out of the workplace and are too young to qualify for the pension.
I think that is a difficult issue. One of the things that we're finding that is happening to both men and women is that the early retirement packages for some of them are not sufficient. It's something that I'm taking a very active look at because I do think that it is very important.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Yes, I noticed on the TV today that men were referring to women's problems. Now, I don't think it should be referred to as women's problems. I think they're women's issues, not problems. Because as far as I'm concerned, the problems are the men, not the women. And that terminology, I think, is certainly incorrect.
Thank you very much. No comment is required. Don't you dare say women's problems again. It's women's issues. Go ahead, please. From Victoria.
Mr. McDougall, I was just wondering what could be done about fields in traditionally women's fields and being underpaid in those fields, and what the government can and should do about it. And also, if there's anything that the federal government could do, that in BC there have been cutbacks in support groups for women, i.e. rape centres. And I was just wondering, would this be under the health field? Could the federal government put pressure on the provincial government to reinstate some of these programs?
Our Secretary of State, the Honourable David Crombie, is the one who is responsible for delivering women's programs. And there's been no cutback of the kind of program funding that we are doing just for the kind of thing that you're suggesting. And you might inquire, actually, from the Secretary of State's office as to whether any group that you are involved with would be able to apply for funding from there, because some of those things are real priorities within the women's program funding.
Let me get that clear. Your status of women.
Yes.
David Crombie is women's programs.
Yes.
Shouldn't you have both of these?
Well, the Status of Women ministry is an advocacy ministry, and
you
called me a nag in the beginning, and that's my job.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, good evening, Jack. How are you today?
Fine.
I got a question here for Ms. McDougall. She was saying earlier that she wanted to have the homemaker's pension plan. Now, with the changing times in the 80s and everything, and some of us males having to stay home, is it going to be, are we going to get it too if we stay home for the next 15, 20 years raising our children?
If there were a homemaker's pension plan, I'm sure it would probably apply to anyone who stayed home. I think that what I did say was that there are a lot of other ways to deal with the elderly poor. That is one of them on which we are working. But it would apply to anybody at home.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you.
That's me? Okay, I would like to ask Lady, there are so many questions about the pensions and so. I'm one of the employees, and I'm working for 25 years in a department store, and I'm retiring this year. And I end up without penny of pension. And I feel it would be really nice. There will be some kind of rule or a law to provide us a little company pension when we retire.
The company pension plan will depend in part on whether it's a provincial jurisdiction or federal jurisdiction. Under the federal jurisdiction, the plan will have to pay women the same amount when they retire as it pays men, given all other things being equal in terms of their salary range. But your actual pension benefits will depend on what you have contributed to the plan over the years within your own company. And without knowing more details, I can't give you more advice.
Oh, no, that's not the point. Like, there should be some kind of rule they let us to contribute because, like I say, I've been working for company 25 years, and it's almost time to retire. And I say, well, there was chance to apply for the steady part-time, which I be eligible to a certain amount of pension, but I failed that. And somebody else was taking from my department instead, which was years back. Now I'm widow for quite few years, and I end up without a penny. And I see that's not for me, that's too late, because I have to only 10 months to work. But I say, well, for other ladies who are probably in my position or another, because all of us, we like to have the same thing for our hard work, just to receive those few dollars. It's not charities or anything.
Thank you, ma'am. She got done out of a pension earlier on. And one day pensions are going to have to be equalized and maybe they should be indexed like
well,
federal pensions.
we've gone a long way to doing that. And once again, there's more that is going to have to be done, but it's a very important issue.
Well, my thanks to you, Barbara McDougall. I promise not to go to this club in Calgary, the Petroleum Club, even if invited.
I could give you a whole list of clubs not to go to.
Many in Vancouver you want to give me?
Yeah.
My thanks to Barbara McDougall. Next, a complete change of pace after the break.
We talked about smoke.
In my line of country, as is said in the most hackneyed manner, I get to meet such interesting people. Often, however, I cannot use them as name drops. But just let me tell you that my next guest used to come to the Webster New Year's Eve hogmanay, complete with bagpipes, party, and all. And you may now look into the camera, Jimmy.
Thank you very much.
This is the fabulously, disgustingly successful James Clavell.
Do you know the secret?
No, what's the secret?
Well, once upon a time, I used to live in West Vancouver. And I had these two friends. One was called Jack Wasserman and the other Jack Webster, and they gave me the pointers. They pointed me like a bird dog in the right direction. All my success.
Entirely?
Entirely.
And everything you touched turned not only to gold, but to classic literary material.
Sometimes.
Just let's remind some people. King Rat. Say something about it.
It's King Rat, story of my life in 1945. What happened to me approximately when I was a prisoner of war.
In Changi
in Singapore.
In Singapore. Taipan.
Taipan, the story of the founding of Hong Kong.
Noble House.
Story of Hong Kong in 1963. Story of Dundas. We're actually just going, I've just made the deal 2 days ago to do that as an 8-hour miniseries with NBC, and we start shooting first week in January.
Shogun.
Story of Japan. Story of an Englishman who goes to Japan in 1600 and becomes a samurai and finds this beautiful girl and falls in love with her, and she's wonderful.
I watched that damn thing. That was great. That was the best one from my point of view.
Well, yes, it was. Don't forget, I was executive producer on it, and I managed to get rid of the first producer who wanted to make it in Morocco and England. And I said, well, how are you going to do Japan in Morocco and England? He said, well, you put them in a coolie hat, baby, and, they won't know any difference anyway. So I got psst, and gave him the big E, as we call it in England.
How many were made into movies? King Rat was a great movie.
Yes.
George Segal.
Yes.
Next one? Taipan?
Taipan, that's made by Dino. It's out. Dino De Laurentiis is out now. I had nothing to do with that. That's not mine.
That's the one that's getting knocked and ribbed and kicked, isn't it?
Yes, well, reviews are mixed. I've heard that. I haven't, as I said, I haven't seen it yet.
You haven't seen it yet?
No, absolutely not. I haven't had the opportunity yet. But reviewers are not necessarily arbiters of public faith, as you know so well. So I hope that it's going to be successful.
And then, of course, The Scotchman. What one's the Australian playing in? Quick. That's the one that's out just now.
Taipan. Brian Brown. He's a wonderful actor.
He's got the most dreadful Scotch accent I ever heard in my life.
I agree.
Imitation. And then, of course, we come to another small, tiny tome. Whirlwind. What's this about? I'm going to read this in Hawaii at Christmas time, but I can't read it before.
I hope you'll enjoy it. Well, hopefully this does for Iran what Shogun did for Japan. Perhaps it just lifts the corner of the veil and tells you about Iran, tells you... It's set in 1979, and it's a high-adventure story about a group of helicopter pilots.
I hate to be crass,
What's that?
One hates it to to probe into the financial affairs of an old family friend. We're getting better friends by the minute. But there was an auction, was there not, for the paperback rights to Whirlwind?
Right.
Yes.
You asked me the question.
I've asked you, there was an auction.
Yes, there was an auction.
You can pick up the cue.
Right. Okay.
How much did you get on the auction of the paperback rights for Whirlwind, this massive book, which sells for $34.95?
That's a lot of tutty.
Yes.
That's a lot of wedge.
Yes.
Well, I put on the table for these 14 publishers who wanted to be my publisher a completed manuscript, which is very, very rare. It was a virgin manuscript this high, 2,483 pages. Took me 5 years to construct it. I said, gentlemen, you choose. And so they bartered amongst themselves, and the winner had this, had the wisdom, I believe, to bid this vast amount of money, which of course is a promise to pay over a period of years. $5 million.
I was waiting for that.
But it's not right. It was more.
How much more was it?
Oh, a little.
A little more.
I mean, how much more can more be with a sum like that?
Yeah, but the point being now, having got the $5 million in your hand from them...
No, you don't get the $5 million. You get a promise to pay over a period of time. You don't get...
it depends on the sales of the books.
Well, what they're doing is they're really giving you your own money. It's a promise of the publisher to pay, providing he's still in business. And of course, I was taking a gamble that the right publisher won the auction. But actually, if it's out now and it's selling rather well, it is #1, I have to admit.
Rather well.
Well,
top of the heap.
You taught me to say
rather well.
You taught me to say it that way back in the radio days. And so these people bartered amongst themselves and chose it. Now, what it is, of course, is hopefully it's entertaining. It gives you 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, perhaps, of entertainment. You learn a little about Iran, as I learned about it.
I'm sure, but I wanted to ask you another financial question. The $5 million, it comes as the books are sold.
Proportions do. No, what they do is, well, in this case, every deal is different. In this case, it's spread forward over a number of years, which you can do tax-wise. So in January, you get a proportion of money.
Yeah. There's no minimal non-refundable deposit.
Not in this case.
Not in this case.
Not in this
but
case. You told me again about that. Get the money.
But such is your stature, you put it on the table and say, gentlemen, read it and bid.
Oh, I gave them only 200 pages. And I set in advance certain things, like royalty and so on. But then it was up to them. They believe it's worthwhile. And actually, if you figure it out, if it sells in the way that it is selling now, it is #1, as I said, and that is only after 8 days of being actually on sale.
It's a veritable whirlwind of sales.
Yes, it's wonderful too. You will enjoy it.
Living now?
I live in Switzerland now.
In the high country?
Pays d'Arnaud, yes.
Pays d'Arnaud.
Pays d'Arnaud.
That means high country.
That means high country.
Jimmy, you want to take some phone calls?
Certainly, love to.
The James Clavell. Your questions after the break. Well, you're on the tour, James,
Yes.
flogging Whirlwind.
No, I'm encouraging people to look at it.
I see. Your language is so much more couth than mine, which is why I can't write a book. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Is that me?
That's you, ma'am.
I just want to say thank you very much for the many hours of pleasure you've given me reading.
Aren't you kind? I really appreciate that.
Well, you've given me such, really, I've enjoyed it. And both that and the TV. I'm looking forward to seeing Type.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always embarrassing when people are nice, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is. Of course, those are the people that make my books bestsellers. I don't do it, and you don't do it, and publishers don't do it. It's people enjoying my work and telling other people about it and hopefully buying it.
Go ahead to James Clavell. Hello.
That me?
That's you, sir.
Oh, good afternoon, Mr. Clavell.
Good afternoon.
I wonder, when you were researching for Shogun, did you ever go to Gillingham?
Yes, strange enough, I did. I was near there at Gravesend. I was stationed at Gravesend, which of course is very near Gillingham.
Yeah.
which was a
I was very disappointed as a Medway townsman that in all that book, even in the preface, you never even mentioned Will Adams, the first Englishman into Japan, whom the book was sort of plagiarized on.
Well, that's a load of
bunkum.
Because I'm a storyteller. I wrote about John Blackthorne, who went to Japan in 1600. Of course, Will Adams went there, and of course I know about Will Adams. And the little sentence in my daughter's school book that said in 1600 an Englishman went to Japan and became a samurai, that certainly sparked me into look at Will Adams, and I found all of his work, of course. But to plagiarize Will Adams is a lot of nonsense.
Thank you.
I'm a storyteller.
Go ahead, please.
Good evening. I've never read any of your books,
Perish the thought.
but I'd just like to ask a question of someone who has never read any of your books, but would like to. Which one would you suggest, or which one would be your favorite?
Well, I think perhaps you should start at the beginning. They're all interlocked. I think that you should perhaps start with King Rat. That was the first one I wrote, and then read Taipan, and then go on through the Asian saga.
Thank you. Funny question to get, isn't it? Go ahead, please.
Mr. Clavell.
Yes.
I've read several of your books and found them fascinating.
Thank you.
But I really go back to King Rat, which I saw the movie first and then read the book.
Yes.
And I wonder if you have any comment on your remarkable insight into the street-smart fighter, the man who just from his own whatever process was able to do what the people who had been trained to do these things did in the extreme conditions of a concentration camp.
Well, you never know who's going to be successful and who's going to be unsuccessful. Under those circumstances, you have to live at the edge of death to appreciate life. And I observed people living under those conditions, and I remembered it, and fortunately, there seems to be some magic in King Rat, and you have read it.
Oh, you survived yourself?
Well, I was there for 3.5 years, as you know, in various prisoner of war camps in Changi and in Java. But everything that happened in King Rat was real. I saw it, or somebody told me about it, and that is as good as I can remember, 16 years after the event.
Good. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Clavell. Are you going to write a connecting novel between Taipan and the Noble House, covering the period of the Hague?
Hagström, I love her. She's a marvelous woman. I've been asked that many times, and perhaps I will. I have to wait and see, because if she visits me, then I'll be able to tell her story.
It's one that I would love to hear. I've enjoyed all of your books, and I would like to see that one in print.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead from Nanaimo.
Oh, I just wanted to thank Mr. Clavell for many, many hours of wonderful reading.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead from Kelowna.
Hi, Jack.
Hi. Mm.
And Mr. Clavell.
Carry on.
Oh, my favorite story is probably Shogun, but my question is, what inspires Mr. Clavell?
What inspires or inspires?
Yeah, what inspires him to write his stories?
Money, usually, or it started off that way in the olden days. Then after I'd written King Rat, I met this fellow walking down the street, and he said anybody can write a bestseller. He said the second one to separate the men from the boys. So I wrote Taipan, and then I met the same fellow, and he said, "Boy, anybody can do it twice. Let's see you do it again."
So you did it again.
So I try and do it again.
You meet him between each book.
The same fellow. He was outside, walking down the street.
What a coincidence.
Yeah, I know, it's awful.
Go ahead, please.
I'd like to ask Mr. Clavell when he left Vancouver and why he left Vancouver, and is he living in Switzerland for tax reasons?
The answer is I left Vancouver about 10 years ago, and I was a summer settler here, and we had a very great time, my wife and I and our daughters. I'm living in Switzerland because it's a convenient place to do it, and I have to be close to my access, but I pay Swiss taxes, I can assure you, and I pay US taxes, I can assure you. And every time I go across the border, they say, Monsieur Clavell, comment allez-vous? How's your Whirlwind? Or they say it in Chinese, because unfortunately, I can't keep a low profile. So I have to be careful where I live.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yep.
Yeah, Mr. Clavell, I've read all your books, and I think they're marvelous.
Oh, thank
But
you.
I'd like to ask you to comment on some of the movies.
Sure.
It seems that when I've seen the movies, well, King Rat was terrific. Shogun, to me, not half as good as your writing. No offense to the producers, directors.
Right.
But I'd like you to comment on how you've seen the movies and how you reacted to them.
Well, King Rat was made by a fellow called Brian Forbes. I didn't like it, actually, because it didn't really make the story. It told incidents from the book. Shogun, the next one, that I was the executive producer, and don't forget, to make a book and to compare it with a movie is like comparing apples and bananas, not apples and pears even. And I thought that one worked for me as well as you can possibly do. Taipan I haven't seen. I've seen Brian Brown's work, but it's one of those things. I had nothing to do with it, so I can't comment on it. I haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm. Mind you, when you're making a book from Shogun, you've got to rewrite the whole damn thing, haven't you?
Oh, it's totally different. I didn't write it. It was written by Eric Bercovici, who is going to do Noble House for me, and we've just got a deal for 8 hours of miniseries on that.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Jimmy, are any of your books on for talking books for the blind at all?
Yes, they all are.
They all are. Good. Because
Yes.
I have my latest. This was 8 months ago, so the last couple you probably will be on it.
Yes. Well, I make an arrangement, and in every country I give away the rights and to the blind, and they can publish it in the touch type as well as the talking books.
Yeah. Well, you have to use the talking books because I haven't been able to read now for 2 years. So.
Oh dear.
And
how
I
terrible.
thank you very much. Oh, don't worry about that. That's just an inconvenience. To hell with it.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
That's you.
Mr. Clavell, brilliant man, and you write, you've given me many hours of pleasure with your books. Where do you get the inspiration, and where do you write the majority of your books? Thank you.
Well, I've written them, strangely enough, one in each house. So when I finished one, we sort of kind of have to move. The inspiration of it, for instance, Whirlwind, I knew when I was writing Noble House, I wanted to do something on, I was going to do Iran. I'd been to Iran in 1974 and 5. That was the first time I went there. So Iran is a interesting place, exotic and wonderful. And then when, of course, the revolution happened, it was rather like the French or the Russian Revolution, so it was a perfect place for me to write a story about.
James, making any public appearances in this town?
Well, I'm on lots of radio shows.
You're not signing books anywhere?
No, I'm not. No.
Jolly good show. You've been a veritable delight and a treasure and a most enjoyable interview.
Thank you.
My thanks to James Clavell, the author of Whirlwind et al. Next, back to serious business with Pierre Cadieux, Canada's Minister of Labour. After the break. The Honourable Pierre Cadieux has been Minister of Labour in the Conservative government at Ottawa since June 30th, and it seems to me that he's been virtually commuting back and forward to Vancouver trying to deal with our troubles on the docks. Were you surprised when you came into office to find this mess which has been around for so many years on the Vancouver waterfront?
Well, I guess I was surprised, particularly when you realize that it's been going on for 16 years, particularly with respect to this particular issue. It's labor relations, as you know, is often a very complex field, and it deals with human beings and with people dealing with each other. And it seems that in this particular issue, there's a basic difficulty, apparently, of persons to be able to sit down and talk about.
It wasn't just like an ordinary dispute over wage rates or pay pay scales or anything like that at all, not an ordinary one.
Well, no, not an ordinary one, because there seems to be one particular issue which prevents the parties to really get into the other issues. And of course, you know as well as me that it's generally referred as a container clause. I'm not suggesting that that is the only problem that may exist between the parties, but it seems to be the issue or the point that pulls the party apart rather than brings them together in order to discuss all the matters that normally you would want to get into in a collective agreement.
The federal government doesn't often act like this with legislation to order people back to work. What are the most serious protests you've had about your legislation ordering them as they are now back to work, both sides?
You mean since the legislation has been in place? Well, I've heard the union people on TV and in the papers, if you wish, say that according to them, this is taking away their rights.
You're treating them like criminals.
Well, I've heard that, but I don't think we've treated anybody like criminals. On the contrary, I think we've made it very clear that unless the parties did come to an agreement, that we would have no other choice but to legislate them back to work.
There is a complaint, if you might say, from the Vancouver Port Corporation. They're basically happy with your action in ordering them back to work. And I think, by the way, that almost everybody on the West Coast, perhaps save and except a couple of union officials and a couple of maritime employers officials, are glad you acted. But there is a complaint from the Vancouver Port Corporation that you've been too slow in the date you give for the recommendations on the destuffing clause. So what is your timing on the destuffing clause and the appointment of the Industrial Inquiry Commissioner?
Well, first of all, I think that it was important for us to look at the interests of all Canadians, and that is one of the reasons why we've acted to reopen the ports. With respect to the container clause, as I've said before, it seems to be the main issue or one of the main issues which creates the problem with the parties. And I think that it was very important that before somebody takes a decision with respect to this issue, that it be looked at very carefully, and therefore there will be an industrial commission that will look into it. And I think that if we want to deal with this particular important question, we've got to give it time. And I've set the date for the report on June 30th, 87 at the latest.
It has been said around here that the issue has been studied to death. Have you any idea who you're going to appoint as the Industrial Inquiry Commissioner yet?
If the issue had been studied to death, I think the parties would have been able to agree on it. So I think that it's important that somebody else looks into it, and I hope they're going to do it as quickly as possible, preferably before June 30th, but at the latest on June 30th.
When do you plan to appoint your Industrial Inquiry Commissioner?
As quickly as possible.
You're looking at, you're giving consideration now to who that might be?
Absolutely. Would you be available by any chance?
No. Now, but even after that, the recommendations of that commissioner have to be formed into a binding contractual agreement by what date?
1st of September.
So is it a firm commitment of the government that when you get the Industrial Inquiry Commissioner's recommendation for a binding contractual agreement on the container clause, that you will put it into the legislation?
That's what the legislation already says.
So there's not going to be any backing away from this. It's going to be solved by the government in legislation after you get your Industrial Inquiry Commissioner's recommendations?
Well, not necessarily, because the legislation also provides for the possibility to the parties to sit down and negotiate a collective agreement. So if the parties between now and June 30th, or the time that the Commission gives me their report, if it's sooner, if the party finally get together and get to the negotiating table and are able to agree and sign a collective agreement, I think that would be super.
Oh, I'd missed that. They're still free to negotiate.
Absolutely.
If they wish and come to an agreement, and then you can back off.
Definitely.
Well, that's something. Have we got some calls on this? Normally we take calls after the first segment, but we slipped some in early, seeing you are only here for the one segment. Go ahead to the Labour Minister, Mr. Cadieux.
Yes, Jack, I'm a longshoreman and I have been on the docks for the last 16 years. And it seems that every time a contract comes up that Mr. Cunningham knows that the federal government is going to step in there. So why would they want to negotiate? The federal government has never negotiated a contract in favor of the longshoremen once. So they know they're going to get what they want, so why would they bother negotiating with us? And that's why they stalled the negotiations.
The man's suggesting that the deal will suit the employers but not the union.
Well, sir, I can't negotiate for the parties, obviously, but I think that if we had two reasonable parties that took their responsibilities, they would sit at the table and come to an agreement. I'm not convinced that the agreement that has been legislated this week is necessarily in favor of either employer or employees, so perhaps the parties would have an interest to sit down and talk.
They've got that option.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, please.
Is it me?
Yes, it is.
Just a quick congratulations for your prompt action there, Mr. Vidal. It's too bad that other ministers cannot take such prompt action to hit these little boys over their hands and stop this foolishness that is crippling this province and, in fact, most of the country. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I wonder if Mr. Cadieux is cognizant of the fact that it was the employers that wrote the
container clause.
Wrote this clause in the first place.
Well, sir, I'm cognizant of the problem that seems to exist for the past 16 years. The clause was introduced 16 years ago, and the parties have discussed this particular clause ever since, and particularly in 1982, where they even formed a committee to see what they could do with it. And at that time, there was an agreement by the two-man committee, one person from the union, one person from the employer, to set a moratorium for 1 year, and apparently the union refused to go ahead with it, and nobody has ever agreed since. So this time I hope that we'll come to a final conclusion of this issue, but again, if the parties want to solve it themselves, they're welcome.
They're free and they've got time to do it. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello.
That's you. Go ahead.
Hello. Yes, I'd like to ask why.
Go on, carry on.
I see. Okay, how it works.
You must have your television sound up.
I'd like to ask why he took so long to get on the case of the people in Thunder Bay when they were threatening the farmers right off the bat, and then right away jumps on the people here in BC. The man in Thunder Bay stood there and said he didn't give a hang about the farmers in Western Canada.
Well, sir, I don't know who you're referring to as to we didn't give a hang to the farmers in Western Canada. I sure did give a hang to the farmers in Western Canada because we, again, put all of the efforts possible into settling the problem out there through negotiation. And I must say that my Deputy Minister, Bill Kelly, went in there and mediated the dispute, and the party came to an agreement, which is the best settlement you can ever get.
Anyway, you got a lot of congratulations from a lot of people here, both the first time and the second time when you ordered the waterfront back to work. The country's in a bad enough state without that particular dispute. My thanks to Pierre Cadieux, Minister of Labour in the federal government, and I shall be back after the break. Come Monday, I've got a child prodigy called Vera Sarovsek on the program, among other things, I suspect. Had a busy week this week. Sure enjoyed Clavell tonight with his $5 million advance on his book. Stay tuned for the news hour. See you Monday, 5 p.m. precisely.